Niezatapialni.
Hello, I'm Iga Ewa Smoleńska, and I'll be joined today by Joshua Eric Sawyer, who is a legendary game designer that needs kind of a little introduction. He started off as any legend does, so he started as a web designer for Black Isle, and where he soon started a career in game development, becoming one of the 8 most influential game designers on the globe.
Really?
He is, yeah. He is, in fact, also a real human being living an adventurous and extremely interesting life in Southern California, serving as a design director at Obsidian Entertainment, now part of the Microsoft family.
That is
Okay,
true.
you can say hello, Josh.
Hello.
That's nice. It's nice to see you.
It's good to see you.
Okay, so first things first, I'm going to talk about what we're doing here. Josh agreed for me to interview him, and we're going to talk a bit about him and him as a person and also as a game designer. And I divided this interview into 2 segments. So the first shorter part is we're going to talk about you, Josh, and how you came to be who you are. And the other longer part, we are going to focus mainly in greater detail on me. Is that okay with you?
Sure.
No, we're not going to do that, Josh. We're going to focus on
It's
you.
your show. I mean, you can focus on whatever you want to.
So, first of all, thank you for being here. And as we already discussed, you know, I'm not an English-speaking native, so I might stutter a bit or lose a word
problem.
here or there. Is it
Totally
okay?
fine.
So hello, Josh, and I would like to start with some questions, and we are going right now into the question of who is Josh, like as a human, and what makes him tick. So I have like a couple of quotations I got from some interviews you did, because you did very like a huge number of interviews during your years as a game designer.
Yep, it's true a lot.
Okay, so do you like having interviews, or is this like a pain in the
No,
butt
that's
for
true.
you
I was just
right
trying to
now?
think, like, I'm wondering if you're doing some deep cuts where you're like mining, like interviews I gave for Icewind Dale 2 in like 2001 or something like that. Like
I
saying
did
things
some
where
of
I'm just
that.
like, cool, like where I'm a completely different human being because it was like half my life ago. I like giving interviews. I think because I started as a web developer and the moderator of a lot of the Black Isle Studios game forums, I got very used to talking to people online, first through forums and then later through social media, and then as a game developer doing interviews. So always love giving interviews. Have no nerves about it. I think because I grew up doing a lot of performance, it's
Yeah, you
it's
did
easy.
drama at school, right?
Yeah, I did drama at school, and then I went to a conservatory of music for a little while, and I'm just used to performing. So interviews kind of feel like the same thing.
Yeah, when I was looking for info about you, I saw that you did a bunch of interviews for not so known services like portals, like web portals, like even for amateurs,
Yeah.
YouTubers. Yeah, so that's very cool. I wish more game developers would do that. So, okay, I found like a quote that I'm going to quote now. Like you once described yourself as a lazy wastrel who plays video games and tabletop RPGs all day, and also a bad student. Did anything change in those areas? Because, as you said, it was very long ago, the interview that took place.
Yeah, I think maybe I've become a little less lazy over time. I still don't think I'm a particularly industrious or hardworking person. I'm pretty easily distracted. I play tabletop games pretty regularly still. I don't play video games as much anymore, but I still play them. And I'm a little lazy. So I think I've changed a little bit over time, but that's
Okay.
still a
So
pretty
you're
accurate
growing.
description.
Yeah, that's okay. And can you tell me, like, what was the most brutal, like, fantasy name you gave your character in an RPG?
The most brutal fantasy
Like
name.
like super hardcore like fantasy, name.
Um. Wow. Do you mean in my own personal gaming,
Uh,
or like for game development? Because I think
like
in
either
game,
way.
I think
I'm
in
just
game development, yeah. So in game development, I still think the most ridiculous fantasy name, and I can't take full credit for it because I worked on it with Colin McComb at Black Isle. We had a mini boss in Icewind Dale 1 who was a Merilith demon, and I was like, oh, okay, like she's a Tanari and she should have a silly demon name. And Colin is a big demon namer. Colin McComb worked on Planescape Torment, and he worked for TSR for a number of years. And we came up with the name Ixonomy, which is YX. Geez, I can't even spell it, but it's Ixonomy. So pretty ridiculous name. We didn't put apostrophes in it, which that would really take it over the top. But that was pretty good. And usually I give my characters. I don't usually give my tabletop characters or my video game characters like super fantasy names. Usually, they're usually like really boring.
Like Bob.
Yeah, like Sam with 2 M's, which makes it fantasy.
Wow.
Yeah, stuff like that. So it'll be, like really simple. I'm usually the guy who has and along those lines, I had another character I played a few years ago named Reggie, which was Regi. So yeah, like real simple, ordinary names usually for most of my characters. Pretty boring, but maybe that's just me.
So you're not just a game designer, and I know quite a lot about you and your hobbies, but you are a man of many interests and passions, and can you please share some of them with our audience?
Sure. Yeah, I think over time so there's a few things like, some stuff that's sort of floated in the background, like history. Like I've always been interested in history a lot and reading about history. I used to read when I was younger. I read fiction, and now usually when I do any reading, it's usually about history in some form or another. But I have a lot of hobbies that usually revolve around a few things that I've noticed over time. They are things that are mechanical. They've been around for a long time, so there's usually some sort of vintage aspect to them.
So still historical value.
Still of historical value and interest. And usually there's some sort of European aspect to it because
You love Europe.
I am a Europhile. So, yeah. So for example, bicycles and cars and watches and guns. These are all things that at various points in my adult life I've gotten interested in, and usually I wind up becoming, I don't want to throw around the word obsessive, but like pretty close. Like my thoughts really get dominated by learning about the hobby, and usually there's the collector aspect to it. So trolling eBay or Craigslist or specialty sites to try to find things, and I like vintage things. So like I have a Mauser K98K, which is a World War II rifle, and it's a Russian capture.
I was about to say that the gun hobby is not very European.
Yeah, World War II is very European. So
yes, it is.
So like I have that, and I have like a Lee Enfield, which is another, like a short magazine Lee Enfield, which is a British rifle, and I have my Volkswagen car and my Volkswagen van, and my Volkswagen van is a 1985 Volkswagen van, and I have a 1967 Fiat 500, little teeny car. So yeah, I wind up getting really into these things, and usually I wind up spending too much time and money on them, and then I usually wind up going like, oh crap, why did I buy all this stuff? And I hate selling things because it's just emotionally draining dealing with people. So I usually wind up just having a bunch of crap lying around. It's not that I'm sick of the stuff. It's just that I get like too into it, and then I go like, oh wow, I don't need all this stuff. Why did I get all this stuff? So yeah, that's stuff that I get into. Bicycling and guns and watches and cars and stuff like that.
And I was also going to ask you, and this actually isn't my question, it's a question of one of my friends that actually follows your interviews and you as a person, as a game designer. And he asked me to ask you that usually when you're being interviewed a lot, there is like a question that nobody asks you, but you would really like to talk about. So do you have like a hobby that you don't ever mention, but like no one asks about, but you like to talk about it? Because I'm willing to listen if you have something like this.
As a hobby, I honestly no. I think part of it is because I like the social aspect of hobbies so much. So motorcycles, I was into motorcycles for quite a while, and I had 5 motorcycles at one point in time, which is ridiculous. But
where do you keep all those like vehicles?
Well, that's a very good question. Well, I didn't have the cars and the motorcycles at the same time, and I did wind up selling a bunch, actually almost all of my motorcycles. So I had, my parents live in Wisconsin. There were 2 motorcycles there, and then there were 3 motorcycles in California. And these aren't like super expensive high-end motorcycles, but they're still motorcycles. They still take up space. So, but the thing is, like, I like the social aspect of it. I like the sharing aspect of it, talking about that stuff. So most of my hobbies, I share that stuff on social media.
Okay.
The only one that I don't so much, because it's a little embarrassing, is watches. Because watches.
Why do you find watches embarrassing?
Well, because they're unnecessary. Like, it's almost easier to argue that you need a gun so you can protect yourself in the United States than to say, I need a watch, right? Like, it's an easier argument to make that you need a gun than you need a watch. Like,
well, in Europe, I think you would find more watches than guns and people.
Of course. I mean, as an American, living in America. So watches are very, mechanical watches especially, are very expensive, and they're not super wasteful, but they kind of cost a lot of money, and so it's just it can seem kind of ridiculous sometimes because, I mean, not that I have any watches like this, but there are watches that cost like $50,000, $100,000, and things like that,
yeah.
And it can just seem kind of ridiculous. So sometimes it's hard for me to talk about that stuff because I understand that it just seems very stupid to a lot of people, and I totally understand their viewpoint. I just think they're cool, is what it comes down to. No, I mean, the only other thing really is that, and a lot of people, some people do just because of Fallout New Vegas, but I still really enjoy singing, and I sang for Fallout New Vegas, and I sang for Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2 on the soundtracks. And
there was actually mention of that in the No Clip documentary, right? Like, where they actually filmed you singing.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. It was certainly part of the documentary for Pillars of Eternity. But yeah, so I still really enjoy singing, but I wouldn't even say it's a hobby necessarily. It's just a thing that I do. Like, I do it kind of in my daily going around, and sometimes in little bits, like I'll be talking to someone and just, it's not that I sing a song, I'll just like,
you hum.
Or I'll say, I need to say something to someone and I will sing it instead of saying it just because it's funnier that way. Like, I don't know. Like, so that's probably the only thing that I don't really talk about that much. And I don't even know if it counts as a hobby, but there you go.
Like, a note to the audience, Josh streams games sometimes on his Twitch channel, where he does occasionally sing the things he wants to say. So
yes.
That happens.
Yes.
I can vouch for that.
Yeah, so it happens on Twitch and it happens at work. I have one of my tattoos that I have is of Smith of Wooten Major, who's a J.R.R. Tolkien character, and the illustration of him is he's holding a hammer. he's a smith, so he's holding a hammer over his head, and his mouth is open because he's singing. And in the story, he's like inspired by the land of fairy, and so he creates these beautiful works of iron, and he sings while he works, and everyone hears him for miles around. And so because I always like have this idea of like singing kind of in my life, even while I work, that kind of, I will never sing professionally, but I think that will always be part of who I am, because even from my youngest memories, I remember singing with my father. So
thank you for sharing that.
of course.
Okay, so let's talk about you for some more, then we're going to go into the game designer part, okay?
Sure.
So one thing that is visible on your social media is a person called Sesame.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a bit about who that is?
Yeah, Sesame is a cat. So I was in a relationship for about 11 years with someone who had a white cat named Suki, who's very pretty and sweet. And I had not, at that point in my life, ever had a pet of my own. Like, I had pets growing up, but I never had a pet of my own. And at some point, I realized that as much as I loved Suki was really my partner's cat. And I was like, I think I want a cat to take care of and be sweet too. And my partner's cousin had a stray cat run into her home and run behind a dryer and immediately give birth to two kittens. Like they basically
run, you would say.
Yeah, they opened the door, the cat ran in, they were like, what is she doing? Ran behind the dryer, and she just immediately gave birth. And they were like, what? And they got a box and they took care of them, and they didn't know what to do with the kittens, and so I took Sesame, and Sesame has been with me now, 14 years this year. We never got an exact date when she was born, so we celebrated on Labor Day, but she's 14 years old, and she's very, very sweet, and she has been in a couple of Obsidian games, not named Sesame, but named like Cutest Cat or Animancy Cat. She was in Pillars of Eternity 1 as Black and White Cat / Cutest Cat, and then she was in Deadfire as Animancy Cat. But she's my special little kitty.
Okay, so let's talk about more. Let's start focusing on game designer you.
Sure.
Can you tell us what inspires you? Like, do you find inspiration in plays, art, music, books?
Yeah.
All of those.
Yeah, all those things. I would say that mechanics-wise, I think I take mechanical inspiration from other games. Playing other games is still important to understand just the mechanics and the process by which games are made. But in terms of subject matter, I usually draw inspiration from outside of games. I think one of the things that kind of got me burned out on games for a while is so much rehashing of the same type of stuff. Which I know, given that I work on a lot of fantasy stuff, might sound kind of ridiculous because so much of fantasy is very heavily constrained by genre conventions. But that actually makes it more important for me to find inspiration outside of the stuff that everyone else is playing. So it might be plays, it might be because I even though I dropped out of the music program in college, I still wound up getting a minor in history. So I still performed plays, I directed a musical, I still have read a lot of plays. I'm very comfortable with drawing inspiration from that. I think a lot of my way that I write dialogue, I think about it in terms of either play or screenplay. I love movies. I get a lot of inspiration from films. Music, lots of little things inform either music or just ideas or even phrases and character dialogue. I don't quote things verbatim because that would be very conspicuous and obvious. But even so, there are little things that work their way in. Like there's a damn it. I was going to say, is it a, why can't I say, oh, feet, perk. There's a perk. I got my brain confused. There's a perk in Fallout New Vegas called Friend of the Night, which is a title of a Mogwai song.
There are a lot of song titles in Fallout.
There's a lot of
New
song
Vegas,
titles.
Actually.
There's a lot of song titles,
Like
but
every quest is a song title, right?
Every quest is a song title. Although that was more of a convention, whereas like Friend of the Night is just that's a modern song reference. In Pillars of Eternity, there's a ability for one of the paladin orders called Strange Mercy, which is a Saint Vincent title. So like little things like that work their way in. And art. I mean, my father is an artist, and I wanted to be an illustrator for a long time. Being colorblind makes that very difficult, but I still really love art, and I have a strong background in art. So, whenever I travel, again, especially to Europe, I love going to museums. Like, I love going to museums so much that in the end of 2015, my then girlfriend and I went to museums in Munich and Vienna, and she's an art teacher, and even she was like, I can't go to any more art museums. I was like, oh no, we got to hit this one. They have an Egon Schiele. We got to go to this one. I got a Klimt. So that's actually as a tangent, that's the obnoxious thing about Vienna, is that their two most famous artists are Gustav Klimt and Egon Schiele, and their artwork is spread out over like a dozen museums. Yes. So if you go to like the Belvedere, you can see a few, or the Albertina, you can see a few. But if you want to see like a bunch of them, you're going to have to go to like a dozen museums. So I personally try to get. When I started in the industry, I used to work every day, like literally every day, and it wasn't
like
really
as a
good.
web designer, or when you started
as a game designer.
Games?
As a game designer.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, I've told this story many times, just to show where my mind was at. But like in around 2000, at some point I realized that I'd come into work for over 320 days straight, and no one was making me do that. No one was asking me to do that.
Like almost a year then.
Yeah, almost a year. And
wow.
I didn't take off time for holidays or vacation. And someone had said to me like eventually like, hey, maybe you should not be at work all the time. And it was weird though, because when I wasn't at work, I felt this anxiety like I should be at work. But when I was at work, I wasn't necessarily working. I was like playing games, or like doing stuff like that. But it was very much, it didn't really feel like I was growing as a person, or like interacting with people outside of work, which is very strange. And then I finally sort of snapped out of it, and I started, dating someone. It was like the first adult, post-college relationship that I had had. And I got back into fencing because I fenced in college, but then I stopped when I moved out to California.
You did many things, dude.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's once I started kind of living life to the extent that I wanted to outside of making games, I think my ability to make games actually got a lot better, because I could bring things to it.
You need to have a very varied background to make
you
good
have
games,
to really varied backgrounds. And I really try to encourage people to not be at work all the time, and to have hobbies outside of work, because it just makes them better. And people can bring things to our games that I don't have experience with, and none of us do. Like Kate Dollarhide, who I love working with, is one of our writers here, and she knows a lot of things about plants. And I wish I knew more about plants. I don't. But she knows a lot of stuff about plants. She knows a lot of things about birds. It's a personal interest of hers. And every time we have someone on the team who has these interests that are not mine, and they don't really have anything to do with games, but they can be applied to games, I just think it makes everything a lot better.
It broadens the team's horizons, and that's always good for the player. Yep. Also.
Absolutely.
Okay. So, like, apart from the inspiration bit, Can you tell me? Wait, I got like super lost in my notes.
No worries.
Okay. Let's do this one. So focusing on games, what do you think you like most about games, like as a medium?
Oh, it's definitely the interplay between the player and the designer. Like, it's the ability to have the player do something that gets a reaction. I mean, that's very basic and primitive, but I mean that's it, right? Like, the reason you play a game
Yep.
is that I give input
That's
and then
actually
something
the
happens.
medium.
That's the medium. So like, I know it sounds silly, but like, I guess the reason why I feel it's important to say that is I've ranted about this a little bit, but like, I don't really like when games become movies that you kind of press a button during.
So
like,
not really interactive and without choices.
Yeah, I don't understand why
And
we're
without
using,
mechanics, actually.
yeah, without mechanics, or rather, maybe there are mechanics, but they're inconsequential. Like, the reason why I like role-playing games is because, yes, it's storytelling, and it can be structured or very loose storytelling.
We're going to get to that, actually.
But like, there's interplay there between the player and the designer, and I don't know, like, I generally, I'm not saying people are wrong for doing it. It just doesn't interest me when I see games that are essentially movies that you play through, even if the mechanics are really well polished. They aren't very interesting to me. So
Okay.
so yeah, I like that the medium is something that you play with, and specifically for the types of games that I work on, I like that interactive storytelling and choice and consequence are a thing that you can also do that in a book, like a choose your own adventure book. But I like the medium of games because it's a broader experience. It can be audio, visual. It can be based on not just story choices, but also mechanical choices and how
Yes.
those things work together. So yeah, that's it.
Okay. Now I'm going to say something, and do correct me if I'm wrong and stop me if I'm like coming on too strong, but I would certainly call you a storyteller. Like, would you
Sure,
agree to
yeah.
that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, even if
And
I'm not professionally a storyteller, I think in talking to people, I'm a storyteller. So
no, like I mean, looking at your body of work, like your ludography, if you would, it's like your roots are, as you said, in the RPG genre, and looking at your career, you're still very interested in RPGs.
yes.
And what makes RPGs so special for you?
It is that that give and take between the person running the game in the loose sense and the people that are playing the game to collaboratively make a story. And I started playing Dungeons and Dragons when I was 10 years old. And Dungeons and Dragons is it's interesting because there's a lot of collaborative storytelling, and as time goes on, that's become more and more the forefront of what D&D is about. But also at the heart of it, D&D is really like a combat simulation game. It grew out of tabletop wargaming, but it's this interesting combination of there are these combat mechanics and there are these skill mechanics, and then there's this collaborative role playing that takes place between the rules and the people playing and the people running. And the most fun that I've had are when I'm either playing in a game or running a game where that relationship is very give and take, where everyone has trust in each other and respects each other, and the GM or the DM creates a cool framework for a story that the players then push and pull, and the DM takes it in a direction that is guided by their own instincts, but also definitely pushed by what the players want to do. And the great challenge for single player computer RPGs is that we have to create a framework that we can't run it. Like, We have to create a
Yeah.
framework where everything is predetermined, but it still feels reactive to how you made your
Want to
character
play, yeah.
and how you want to play, and that's very hard to do in a satisfying way. But that's what's so enjoyable, and that's why that as a challenge, that's why continuing to make role-playing games is still an enjoyable challenge, because we're still trying to find more and better ways to fulfill those player fantasies when we're not there. When there's a
Okay.
dungeon master there, the dungeon master can always react
Yes, in real time.
in real time. But when we give you Fallout New Vegas, or when we give you Pillars of Eternity, we have
Yeah,
to
it's
hope
done.
that
It's
we
like,
fulfilled
yeah.
it for you. Like, we can watch and go like, oh, cool, they think that's funny, or yeah, they really like that that's line there, or oh, they really like that in the scripted interaction they can cast a spell to put the fire out, which, if you were playing a tabletop game, you'd say, oh, there's a fire, I cast Cone of Cold, I put it out. And then we put that in the game in like Pillars of Eternity, and people go, oh, that's so cool. Like, you can actually use your spells to interact with it like it's a tabletop game. So that's really what I enjoy about that.
The reason I'm asking this is because like RPGs are like a really vast canvas. They're like a really big, huge genre. And they describe the world, they describe the inhabitants, they describe everything that's in it. And they are like in a far greater detail than all the other genres that are on the market right now. So why did you choose to be a game designer and not somebody from all the other fields? Like, what makes the game designer role so special for you?
You mean as opposed to like a programmer or something?
I was thinking about more of a writer, or
Oh, a writer.
like
Um,
someone who actually like makes the story, maybe not the story, but the game whole, but from like a whole other perspective.
I mean, I think it's this will sound really stupid, but I'm going to say it anyway. I didn't make a conscious choice to become a game designer. I started designing games when I was in high school. Like, the process of it was we were playing Dungeons and Dragons, and we had been playing it a lot for a long time. There's actually people I still play with that live in Wisconsin, where I grew up, that I've been playing with since high school or middle school. And we kept running into problems with the rules, like things
I'm
that we
sorry,
just.
but do they also play your games, like your games
Some of
that you
yeah,
make?
some of them do. Some of them do. Yeah, some of them
Okay.
actually play the computer games that I've made. But we were running into these problems, and I was like, yeah, these rules suck. I was like, does anyone mind if I just change these? Like, none of us seem to really like how this works. So do you mind if I just change this rule? And they were like, yeah, that seems good. And I just kept doing that, and I realized, like, yeah, it's that easy. Like, game design at its essence, like, you can just
So you were like kind
just
of a
do it.
modder then.
Yeah, like a modder of second edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. And then in college, actually, even before I got to college, in high school, I was like, I'm just going to make my own role-playing game. And to me, it didn't really seem hard. Of course, I never had to actually finish the role-playing game, but the idea of just like, I'm going to write rules, and we're going to play them, and I'll just keep writing more rules, and we'll keep playing them. That just seemed like a thing
Yeah,
that I
but you
would.
also, like, I imagine you also wrote a story of the world and
Yes.
the inhabitants and stuff
Yes.
like that. But
Yes.
you still focus more on the rules, right?
I saw them as intertwined because you
Like
can't
organic.
you can't run a tabletop game. Well, I mean, you can run a tabletop game without rules, I suppose. Like, you could have just freeform storytelling. But I knew that I was like, well, I want to have my own rules, and I want to have my own setting, because the settings that we played in, I'm like, these are fine, but there are things even at that point in time where I'm like the Forgotten Realms, so many people have contributed to the Forgotten Realms setting that it really feels like hundreds of people have contributed to the setting. And I was
It
like, well,
does.
if I make my own setting, even if it's small in scope, it's mine, and I can make it however I want. So if I want to lean really heavily into historical stuff or like weird languages or whatever that is, I can do that. All I have to do is just write it down, give it to my players, and if they think it's cool, we play with it. It's fine.
Was
And
it
so,
fantasy?
what's that? It was fantasy. And then, although in college, then I was like, okay, now I'm going to make a sci-fi version of the rules and the same setting, but like in the future. And yeah, so I didn't. It's weird. I recently had some conversation with someone where I said, I didn't. This will sound naive, but I didn't think that game design was something that you would do as your full-time job. And I also didn't really know that game designers were, like, I didn't think of video game designers, really. So, like, I knew that there were individual people that made rules for tabletop.
Mm-hmm.
And I must have known that somebody made computer games, but I didn't really think about it or think, like, that's what I'm going to do. I thought, I'm going to make tabletop games because I'm already doing it. Like, we played whole campaigns with my
But wait,
rules. And
was it like something you decided that this was going to be something you would do, like as a career? Like,
No.
you will. Okay.
No,
so-
it was something that I did. That's the thing. Like, that's why I say, like, I didn't really decide to become a game designer. I just started doing it, and then I did it more, and I ran games, and I don't even remember in my mind if I thought, like, well, I'm going to get art and publish this. Maybe I did. I don't know. Like, I would have probably been fine just continuing to play with my friends, revise the rules, make another set of rules, make another setting. I mean, I think tons of people actually do this. Either they heavily modify existing rules, or they make their own rule sets and they just play with their friends. And so I wasn't like, this is my career. I mean, I was going to school at the time. I mean, I went to school for voice, singing, and theater, and then I graduated with a degree in history and a minor in theater. I didn't, clearly I was not like, yes, time to design games as a career. Like, again, I didn't really think that that could be a career, even if it's something that you could do and make money at. And then it was just because a friend of mine told me about the job at Black Isle Studios, and I had taught myself web design, and I was like, oh shit, like, I could go work for a video game company that makes
designing
role-playing
web
games.
pages
Yeah, designing web pages. And I was like,
in Flash.
that's cool. Yeah, I'll do it in Flash. And in my mind, I was like, oh, dude, that would be so cool if I could then move over into game design, because then I started to understand, like, oh, game designers are there, and people who write and who make rules and design areas. So that's kind of how that went. But it was a very lucky coincidence, because I really wasn't like focused on. I thought when I graduated that I was going to go do a tattooing apprenticeship. Like, that's kind of what I thought I was going to do, because I didn't know what I was going to do with my degree. And because I had designed websites for tattoo parlors and gotten to know some of the people there, I was like, maybe I can do an apprenticeship, like go back to illustration, which, you know, is ridiculous because I had given it up for so many years. It was dumb. Anyway, it's not what happened. but that's what was going through my mind. I was like, yeah, I'm going to graduate.
You
I'm going
can
to move.
still like tattoo, Josh. Like, nothing's stopping you.
I know. I know someone, a friend, Cindy, who she just started learning how to tattoo, and now she's a professional tattoo artist like a year and a half later. So I know it's possible, but yeah, that's just how my mindset was at the time. I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do with this. I'll design web pages, because I had been designing web pages. I'll become a tattoo apprentice. I don't know.
Like, as a art history and cultural studies major, I can tell you that I was also not prepared for like planning a career.
Yep.
But,
Oh well.
yeah. And you did become a game designer, and I have another quote from an interview.
Okay.
You once said, okay. My game development interests are primarily in finding ways to give the player more meaningful choices in how they build and use their characters, and in how they can influence the story. I'm also a fervent, possibly fanatical advocate of strong core mechanics. And good for an RPG is an insult, and no player or developer should settle for that level of quality. And I would like you to elaborate on what is the level of quality developers should settle for, and where, in your opinion, can one find the core mechanics that you were speaking of here?
I think good should be genuinely enjoyable. I know that
Okay,
might seem
but
like
by
a very
like for the developer or for the player?
Well, for the player. I mean, who
Okay.
fucking cares for the developer? Like, I mean, people
I
will
kind
say
of
this.
do, dude.
I mean, because the people will say, well, I like this, like a developer. I don't know. I think a lot of developers need to get their heads out of their ass about what they like, or what they tolerate. Like, obviously, you want to make something that you enjoy and that you're passionate about, but you're not going to buy 1 million copies of your own game. Like, you're making it for an audience. I mean, you can also make games as art that are not intended for profit, and I fully respect that. And in which case, do whatever the hell you want. I mean, like, again, I grew up with my father is a bronze sculptor who has very, 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 maybe the strongest opinions that I've ever seen in an artist about how his own art should be made, which has led him into conflicts with clients where he's like, I'm the artist. I decide how this is done. And that's certainly a way that you can go through life, and that I fully respect that. But the way that I kind of look at things is, if you are going to make something specifically because you want other people to appreciate it, or to give you money for it, then you have to drop the facade that your opinion is the most important thing. Like,
Okay.
because it's not like if you care that about someone else's opinion, or if you care that someone else is going to buy it, then your primary concern is not your own personal self-satisfaction, or at least it's not 100% of what you're
Okay,
interested
but tell me, like, do you believe that a game, like, as a work of art of somebody, like as an artifact of sorts, can be good if the developers are not passionate about it, in your opinion?
Probably not. Probably not. But here's the thing, like, I will see people who will defend to the death a very specific, weird implementation of something where they think it's really good, almost no one else thinks it's really good, and if they changed it like 10%, they would still actually be fine with it, and everyone else would immediately be much, much more accepting of it.
Okay.
Like, it's this very specific, like, clinging to a level of specificity where, I don't know, there's this kind of tolerance threshold where I can make something that is super esoteric that I love and I know repulses 1 million other people or everybody, and that's valid and fine. I can also make the choice to change, let's say, 5 to 10% of the things in there that are slightly less exactly what I want, or what I personally think is perfect or ideal, that invites in a much huger audience of people, if that makes sense. So it's times like that where I feel like when people are saying to a developer, hey, everyone has a problem with this, it's frustrating to them, they don't understand it, it's not clear, and they're like, it's clear to me, I get it, I don't see what the problem is. It's like, okay, like, that can be the end of the conversation, but if that is the end of the conversation, that's also the end of the conversation without audience. Like,
Yeah.
So
it's about finding the sweet spot.
Yes, and granted, again, I will fully respect, I will always respect the quote unquote pure, the purist, the unrelenting, unforgiving artist, who will say, I will do things 100% the way that I want to do them,
Even though some people...
even with no
Right.
regard for what anyone thinks, which I fully respect, and that's fine. However, if I hear that person complain that people don't like their game or are not buying their game, I will tell them to go fuck themselves. Because...
You're gonna be rude, okay?
Well, no, because, like, get real. Like, you can make that choice, and that's perfectly valid. But if you say up front, I don't care about these other things, I just care about my own personal fulfillment, that is totally valid. But to then later complain about other people's opinions or sales is ridiculous. Like, because you made that choice, you made that trade-off. And we all have to do that to one. Some people don't care at all about their personal fulfillment. I don't generally think that it produces really enjoyable games, but sometimes maybe they do, and I don't know. And there are other people that try to strike a balance, and there are some people that make things that is just purely for their own satisfaction, and they don't give a shit about anything else. Those are all fine and valid ways to approach making games. I do think it is, though, ridiculous. Like, I also think it's ridiculous if you make games and you are purely focused on the player, the audience, market research, getting the highest Metacritic, the best sales.
Yeah, but that's like from the guy that you told us doesn't care at all about the audience, and then jumping straight to like the other side of the spectrum. So just looking at the numbers and just looking at the games at the market and copying each and every decision those designers made for your game to have, because that's what people want, like creates this kind of like a Frankenstein game.
It can, and I guess the thing is, from my perspective, if someone or a company or a group of people say, we want to make the most financially successful game that gets a very high Metacritic, and that's their goal, and they do that, and then like they find that a lot of players say, this is kind of a intellectually, artistically bankrupt game. Mm-hmm. And then those people who made it complain and say, like, why don't you respect what I made? It's like, well, we don't respect what you made artistically because you didn't respect what you made artistically. Like, you wanted to make a best-selling game. You wanted to make a high Metacritic game. You made something to fulfill an economic and, like, a monetary thing. Valid. Totally fine. But then later, if you complain that people don't respect the art when you didn't respect the art, yeah. it's and again, like if you didn't respect the opinions of players or the financial viability of a product, that's fine. But then later to complain about it just seems silly. So with all of this stuff, again, I think that all of these approaches are totally fine and valid ways to approach making games, but it does get silly when people have these very extreme stances and then later kind of complain when those stances don't, like, they kind of bite them in the ass. I don't see a ton of people do that, but it does happen. I mean, you can see people who, and I'm sure people will complain about me saying this, but like, people will get mad if people don't think that the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies are super artistically valuable. And
they're blockbusters, like
they're blockbusters.
They're meant to like appeal to a wide variety of people, so they...
Yeah, and it's great, and like, and I personally know many artists who have contributed to the making of those films, and they do good art, and it's beautiful and whatever. Am I gonna say that it's on par with art, capital A, like art films? No. Don't get mad at me about that. Like, that's not why fucking like the Avengers was made. Like, don't be silly. I know I went like way off track here, but I guess this all comes back when I'm talking about mechanics. When you're making mechanics, I do think that if you want people to actually enjoy the game, I do think there's a threshold that you need to aspire to where you actually get, like, so for example, a lot of older Obsidian games, I would even include Fallout New Vegas in this. Again, we tried in Fallout New Vegas. Fallout New Vegas, the gun mechanics, we tried to improve on Fallout 3. Fallout 3's gun mechanics were not that great. Fallout 4's improved on both.
I would say you did a great job because Fallout New Vegas felt amazing compared to Fallout 3.
Well, thanks. But then 4 felt even better than that.
Like, you don't know that because you don't know Polish that well, so you don't listen to our podcast. I am not a big fan of Fallout 4 or 3. I'm a big fan of Fallout New Vegas, so...
Well, thanks.
Let's agree to disagree, okay?
Sure. Well, I guess there's something... Well, there's other things that I will say about, like, you know... I can say that the weapon progression and the RPG system of Fallout 4, I will criticize a lot of things about that. At the core level of how gun handling, iron sights, modding, all of that works, that is a stronger foundation in the game. Like, those mechanics are foundationally better executed than in New Vegas.
It's like a super newer game.
I know that. I guess what I'm saying, though, is that for a long time in role-playing games, especially as we moved into these first-person or direct control or action sort of scenarios, we would see games that had very clunky and clumsy mechanics. A lot of people will talk about Alpha Protocol, another Obsidian game, where a lot of the gun mechanics feel really frustrating.
One of my co-hosts is actually a super big fan of Alpha Protocol, and he asked me to ask you do you think like someday he could get an Alpha Protocol 2?
I think that would be cool. I don't know how that would happen, though, because Sega owns the franchise. I have talked to Fergus about us. I think it would be cool to make a spiritual successor, another...
Like Beta Protocol, or...
Yeah, maybe beta is the wrong word, but like, Omega Protocol or whatever.
Maybe.
Omega Syndrome, something. But, something that's a spiritual successor. But the thing is, like, Alpha Protocols, people don't really like Alpha Protocol's core combat mechanics because they're pretty clumsy. They like the storytelling. And I guess that's what I'm saying is like, if you could get Alpha Protocol
with...
with...
mechanics of Alpha Protocol, though?
Did I?
Yeah.
Oh, hell no.
No, okay.
No. I designed the close quarter combat mechanics of Alpha Protocol.
Okay, so I did...
which I think are actually good. I think that the close quarter combat system does exactly what it needs to do, and it's fun, and it's easy to use, and those were the goals that I set out to accomplish with it, and I think it did a pretty good job. But the gun mechanics and a lot of the other stuff were pretty clunky and clumsy, and I can't even really you can't really even hold the designers responsible for that, though, because a lot of the ways that work was dictated by Sega, to our frustration. Like, we didn't want huge spread on guns. Like, we didn't want a lot of that stuff to work the way that it worked. Sega did, which we've said before. But the thing is, like, if you could have Alpha Protocol and the great characters and which I can't take any responsibility for the characters of the story. I didn't have anything to do with that. But if you could take Alpha Protocol, you have the great story, the great characters, choice and consequence, but also the combat was just better, it would be a better game. And I think RPGs, we're getting better at this. We try to put too much stuff into our games. That is part of the charm of RPGs, is that there is so much stuff in the games. But as a result of that, and also as a result of us not really looking at how mechanics are implemented in other genres that we're borrowing from, we often introduce just shitty mechanics, usually combat related. Now, there's a danger in trying to emulate best-in-class combat when your studio doesn't focus on that. But I do think that you do want that gameplay to be genuinely enjoyable by the player. That doesn't mean that it needs to be... Like, if you have third-person melee combat, it does not need to be at the level of Devil May Cry. Don't be ridiculous. However, you can learn a lot from looking at Devil May Cry. You don't have to have FPS combat that is best in class.
Yeah.
Yeah, but like, look at the best in class stuff and say, what's a level of implementation where it's still fun and it's still enjoyable? Because that quote was from quite a while ago, because I think at that time a lot of studios were still in the kind of doldrums of making RPGs with just really fundamentally unfun mechanics, and you had to suffer through them to enjoy the story and the other things. I mean, people are going back and playing Mass Effect Legendary Edition and going like, wow, Mass Effect 1's combat wasn't very good. Yeah,
it wasn't very good.
No, it wasn't. I mean, I feel like I can say that because like Alpha Protocol's combat was even worse than that. So, and whatever, I'm glad that people like Fallout New Vegas' combat, but there's like a lot of stuff that could have been better about it. I do think overall that we are just better about that. Like, RPG companies are better at making those mechanics more fundamentally satisfying. They don't have to be best in class, but they got to be good. And for a long time, I felt like people were defending RPGs having just kind of shitty core mechanics as like, well, RPGs just kind of feel shitty. And I'm like, can we not? Like, we don't need to do that. We can do better than that. And we are doing better than that. So that took me half an hour to answer something that probably should have taken 5 minutes, but there you go.
No, that's amazing, actually. You can keep on going, but I would like to return to the question.
Sure.
Like, you said that you are like a fanatical advocate of strong core mechanics, and if you could, I know that the quote is from a while ago because that was my point to show how you've grown as a person.
Sure.
And as a professional, but can you tell me, like, looking back at some like previous years, like, did you find a game with like really strong core mechanics that you speak of here?
A role-playing game or just any game?
A game, just a game.
I mean, I think when I play, again, sort of best in class or close to best in class games, Splinter Cell, Thief, stealth, like great stealth games. I would look at how stealth was implemented in RPGs, and I would go like, none of this even comes close to feeling like
you crouch, and then you get kind of like a pack, and then you walk around, and nobody sees you, maybe.
And nobody sees you, or maybe they do. And I was like, well, hold on here. Like, something's going... Actually, this is actually really good. I think this is probably a great question because...
Thank you.
So, for example...
I'm amazing.
So, for example, stealth in the Infinity Engine games, Baldur's Gate, Icewind Dale, Planescape Torment, it's essentially like a die roll. So you say, I'm in stealth, and then every few seconds, a virtual die is rolled, and depending on a bunch of stuff, you either get seen or you don't. There's not really gameplay there. You just press a button,
save and
load, and get mad, or you drink a potion. And when we made Pillars of Eternity, and actually now I can't even remember the evolution of the system, at least Deadfire, I said, look, we don't need to make the stealth incredible, but we need to make it at least like a game. and
like
I said
mini stealthing game.
Mini stealthing game. And I said it needs to be mechanically engaging. And I said, and keep in mind, I said there's two parts to this. There's the mechanics and the content. A good stealth game isn't just about, well, there are cool mechanics in it. It's how the levels are laid out, how the AI works, how the AIs are placed in the level, how they patrol, all their signals and tells. Like, so I said these things have to work together. So in Deadfire, we did a lot of work to make it. It's a progressive thing. You can see when you go into stealth, you can see the sight cones of enemies. When you're in the sight cone, the little alert thing fills up faster. Mm-hmm. You can make it go slower if you move away from them. So there is actual gameplay there, and it's not super deep, but it's I think it's better than just pressing a button and rolling a die, and sometimes you get spotted and sometimes you don't. And that's the sort of example of something where, like, I played a bunch of stealth games, and the stealth in Deadfire is not really anything like those games. But also, I learned so much from observing how the mechanics worked in those games to create a new stealth system that felt true to the isometric nature of the game that we were making.
So let's go back to the quote once again, because I have a couple of more questions about it. You said that you are trying to find ways to give the player more meaningful choices in how they build and use their characters. Yep. So tell me about the choices. What is so great about choice in games for you? And then if you could tell me a bit, do you find like a linear story like less interesting than the one that is non-linear?
Good set of questions.
Thank you. I'm amazing at interviewing people.
Yes. So choices, I mean, this comes to the basic fantasy of a role-playing game is that you get to be somebody else, even if that somebody else is in some ways a fantastic version of yourself. You know, people like creating all sorts of different characters for different reasons, and sometimes that person that they make is who they kind of would like to be if they existed in some other foreign world. Or sometimes it's another identity entirely, or something they just think would be fun to kind of play around as. It has the same appeal as play acting. And part of that
actual role-playing.
actual role playing. But part of that is also mechanical. Like, power fantasy plays into not all, but many games, and certainly into role playing games. There is also the sense of power growth in vertical progression, as some will say. If you think about a game like Zelda that has like horizontal progression, which is I get more tools and things, role-playing games often focus on some of that, but also on vertical progression, which is number get bigger, I am stronger, I do more damage, I have a higher 8 armor class, whatever. So there's a bunch of ideas and fantasies to be fulfilled. Like I start as someone that I have pictured in my mind, and then I progress and I change over time. And the reason you play a role-playing game as opposed to just write down a character idea, and there are certainly people that just do that. There are people that really love just making RPG characters and never playing them. It in itself is fun. It's a creative exercise. It's an expression of whatever, or a challenge. Like maybe they're trying to build some just weird mechanical thing, or they have an idea. But then when you play, to express the character, there's the personality of the character, but there's also the capability of the character. And a lot of that comes down to the character is able to solve problems in the world, in the story, in a way that reflects the uniqueness of the concept that the player brought to it. And that's why it feels so special and so rewarding. So when you build a character in a certain, like if you build a wizard and you take cold spells and there's a fire and you can put out the fire with your cold spell, that feels cool. Like the monk can't do that. The monk doesn't have cold spells. Maybe the druid can, if the druid has some cold spells. But like that's the sort of thing where that's why the fulfillment of that, fulfilling the promise, is very important. Something that happened at the beginning of Fallout New Vegas that I think was very effective for the game is when the designers, primarily Eric Fenstermaker, worked on the first area of the game, Good Springs, we had a goal that all of the skills that you could tag would be used in a meaningful way in the town. All of them.
So you could actually see your choices in action.
Exactly.
Okay.
And also, we said by the end of Ghost Town Gunfight, you will be well regarded by one faction, and you will be vilified by the other faction. That's the only two ways that it can really end. And it was through that way that we sort of set up the promise and rewarded the promise of the basic concept of the game. We said, like, trust us, build the character that you want to make, and it will be fun. We will reward how you build the character. Side with the people that you want to side with. That's valid. We will validate that. So if you said, I'm going to be barter and repair and guns, you're going to use all of those in the first area, like in very clear mechanical ways. And then if you say, I want to side with the powder gangers, well, you fucking waste the town. They're all dead and gone. The powder gangers are like, great, you're awesome. Later, when you go to NCRCF, New California Republic Correctional Facility, that reputation comes into play. They like recognize that. If you side,
so long-term consequence also.
Long-term consequences, and so you feel that, and that's why it's important for me that when we think about how the player can build their character, the building is the first part. That's the promise, and then you have to deliver on the promise, because that's like a good dungeon master. No matter what the game system is, or a good game master, no matter what the system is, if someone takes a super weird esoteric skill, a good game master will find a way to incorporate that into the game so that the player feels cool and special and interesting. When I was in college, I had a friend who had made a game that was kind of like Shadowrun, and I had a character who I maxed out my architecture skill, and in almost every session I would try to find a way to apply that to figuring out ductwork, electrical like all this sorts of stuff that was like really tangential but clearly relevant to architecture. And Jeremy went for it. He was like, yep, okay, cool. Like, and it didn't like make or break the game, but it was helpful. It was useful. It made my character feel cool and interesting with everyone else who were doing more combat stuff. Like, we had all these other characters that were like, like I spent most of one combat finding a duct that I shot a gas grenade into that at the very end of the combat knocked out a bunch of reinforcements. And it didn't matter that I spent most of the combat like looking around and climbing ladders and looking in ducts and like doing all this stuff, because at the end of it, it was such a cool ending moment where the rest of the party was like, oh my fucking god, like more guys are coming. And I'm like, no, they're not. So, I mean, that's the sort of stuff where like finding ways to let people build and express the building of those characters. That can be mechanical, that can be through conversation. There's lots of different ways to do it. Yeah.
Okay. So we've talked a bunch about the organic like concepts of game design that actually fulfills the storytelling in a lot of ways. But tell me, what do you think about games with like very little interest in story? And do you even play those games or like them?
Yeah, I think they're fine and they're great, because I think purely sort of quote-unquote gameplay-oriented games are totally fine, and I enjoy playing them. I don't know how great I would be at designing them. I think I could maybe do okay, but like for example, I played a lot of Mordhau, and Mordhau is not. There's no real story to it. There's this vague idea of the Iron Company, and there's basically a red team and a blue team, and they're vaguely European, they're vaguely 15th century. They meet on kind of medieval battlefields that maybe could be somewhere in Central Europe, and they kill each other. And
that's what people in Europe do.
Yep, and it's fun, and I put like 200 some hours into it, and I was never that good at it, but it was fun. And I mean, when I was in college, the game I played more than anything else is Quake 1 Deathmatch. And I was in college, I was really good at it. It's funny because I moved on to other FPSs and I forgot how to play Quake, because Quake, if you haven't played Quake 1 in a long time, it's pretty weird. Like, its mechanics feel very strange compared to a lot of more contemporary FPSs.
They also feel old.
They feel old. They feel old and like and just very esoteric and weird. I mean, you can't really. I mean, Quake just turned 25, but when I worked at Midway briefly,
you did. You worked with John Romero.
I worked with John Romero, and we were talking about Quake.
What do you think about his hair? Is it gorgeous?
It is. It's incredible. Like he takes very good care of it.
It looks lovely. That's
it is.
True.
To behold in person, but. I got into some conversation about Doom and Quake, and I said, oh man, like I used to play Quake Deathmatch all the time. But I said I haven't played it in probably like 5 or 6 years. He still played it, and we played a one-on-one deathmatch, and it was not even close. Like I couldn't rocket jump anymore. Like something is like a really core component of playing deathmatch.
That's really sad, dude.
It's really sad.
It's just really sad.
I was like, holy shit, I can't even remember how to fucking play this game. So it wasn't even close.
So you didn't win, I assume.
What's that? No, I didn't. I didn't even get a frag. It's Quake is Quake 1. Quake 1. It's not that surprising though, because Quake 1 Deathmatch is a game where unless the people playing are pretty closely matched, it's very easy for a single person to completely dominate. Like I mean, I played in tons of deathmatch games in college where I would just if we were playing to 20 frags. I would get to 20 and no one else would even have broken 10. Like, it's very easy for a single player to really crush another player, just because a lot of the ways that the mechanics
But I
in
also
the game
remember like Quake 2, because I've played a bunch of Quake 2 and Quake 3, of course. Like they also seem to work like that, for me at least. Like
yeah.
I just sat down with a bunch of friends, and usually one of us was the best. And like,
yes.
As you said, like really, really the best, not like slightly winning or something like that. So maybe that's
just
the
demolishing.
game. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually had, and granted this was from Q-Test, which was the precursor to Quake, the full game coming out, but I have a screenshot somewhere on one of my drives where someone set the server limit for a map to 100 on Ziggurat Vertigo, and I hit 100, and no one else was fucking close. Like, someone maybe had like 18 from killing people who were not me, but like, it's ridiculous how lopsided those games were. But again, I loved those games. I actually loved Wolfenstein Enemy Territory was another game that I loved. Yeah, I actually really like those competitive team-based first-person shooters.
I was going to just like assume you really like games that don't depend on story but are competitive. But what about single player ones like Tetris or Geometry Wars or I don't know, Super Hexagon?
Yeah, the really abstract ones like Tetris and stuff like that don't interest me that much, but certainly games that are more let me see if I can think of an example that's good. Or maybe even my own Steam library. There must be something. Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, you can say that Hitman is kind of story-oriented, but not really. It's mostly about the mechanical screwing around. I love Hitman. I love the Hitman games. I love Blood Money and all the new Hitmans.
What about Animal Crossing? It doesn't seem to have like it does have some story, but it's not story-oriented.
No, it's not. And I enjoyed Animal Crossing. I mean, the more I played it, the more the things that I didn't like about it really started to drive me crazy, and now I can't play it again. But
and you're talking about the new one because I don't know if you played the old ones, like
yes, I played on GameCube and a few others. So those are fun. I enjoy them. I don't need story. I think that when I make games, story becomes more of a focus because of the genre that I work in. You know, even in something like Icewind Dale, because people will, you know, they'll compare Icewind Dale to Baldur's Gate, and they're like, well, there's no companions, and companions make up such a big part of the story, and it's linear, and it's very traditional. But even so, we did try to make the story a classic dungeon diving tale. So we did try to make dialogue and storytelling like a key part of the game. So even in a game like Icewind Dale, where people generally consider it to be like low story, in my own stuff that I make, there's still story as a big focus.
As a person who just recently played the first one, I would say that it has a lot of story because it has a lot of dialogue and a lot of things that actually tell me why I'm doing what I'm doing. So I would call this a story. Maybe not story heavy, but certainly a story game. Yeah. Okay, but let's go back to the question because can you tell me what you think about games that are actually like linear? Like you have the developers have a story to tell and they just like put the player inside of the game to tell that story.
I think it depends a lot on the specifics. I think linear stories can be totally fine. I think people usually associate me with non-linear stories. I think in some cases maybe they get too non-linear, like Deadfire. A lot of people really did not like how the story was structured there. But I'm fine with games that have linear story if it's done well, I guess.
And can you give me an example of like a good linear story that you found?
Yeah, I mean, like Night in the Woods is pretty linear. I mean, like you can do exploring, and technically there's a little bit of branching in how you kind of go through it. Kentucky Route Zero, there's a lot of story games where essentially they're more or less linear, and it's totally fine. The experience is great. I do think that if you can have a linear story with, actually, you know, it's interesting. Like, actually, I don't know enough about the Telltale games, but like Audrey, my girlfriend, has played Detroit, Become Human, and she's just playing through Life is Strange 2. And those are games that really more or less they really actually are linear, but there's branching that has significant impact. And those are cool.
They sometimes have like separate endings, but still the bottlenecks of the story are there and they're very visible.
Yes, and I think that's totally fine. Yeah, I guess the thing is, where I usually get annoyed is when the story is linear and I'm given choices that kind of fake me out as though there's going to be choice and consequence, and then they never deliver on it. That's really irritating. I really don't like that stuff. I don't see a whole lot of that lately. I think it used to be a little more common maybe 10 or 15 years ago. So yeah, linear games are totally fine. Yeah.
Okay. So let's stop focusing on the story, and I have like a bunch of questions about design that are pretty vague and abstract, so please interpret them as you like.
Sure.
But like the first one, and I'm just going to say it, please share an example of lazy design, Josh.
I really don't like the adjective lazy when applied to design, or just dev work in general. I think usually because when the term lazy design or lazy development comes up, it's almost always from the perspective of a player who really has no fucking idea what they're talking about. They really do have no idea like something that seems lazy often is the consequence of a bunch of other complex shit that has nothing to do with being lazy or hardworking at all. It's just a consequence of something else. I do think, though, that you are lazy. I don't know. It's almost, in my mind, it's more like uncritical design. Like any sort of design where you're not really thinking about, this is my goal. This is what I want to accomplish with this, which is usually something experiential for the player. There's an experience that I want the player to go through. There's a range of emotions that I want them to feel. There's a thought process that I want them to engage in. If you're not actually thinking about that stuff, I'm not going to say it's inherently lazy, because you can do a ton of work to make a game or content uncritically. It can still be very hard work, but it's done without any sort of critical analysis of what you're trying to do with it. And that's worse than being lazy. That's because you just have you don't know what you're trying to accomplish. I don't even know how you evaluate success on your own terms if you don't really think about that. So I do think that asking the question of and answering, what am I trying to accomplish? How are we trying to accomplish this? What are the different ways that we could accomplish this? This is really the heart of what most of my day-to-day work is communicating to people, I'm trying to accomplish this for these reasons. I think we could do it this way. And then developers say, well, that way would kind of be bad because of this and this and this. And, we'll kind of get off track, and then I'll say, like, hold on, but keep in mind that all I want to accomplish with this is to communicate this idea and this feeling. So we don't have to do it the way that I suggested. It's totally fine, because my main
need to focus on the goal.
Is just this. Yeah. So, I'll say, like, I'll say in this environment, I want to really convey the sense of height above the place that you just came from. And I want to emphasize how much colder it is up here, and this and this and this. And we'll be talking about like the scene size and how we transition into it and its orientation. And I'll say, you know what? Like, I don't care. Like, however I drew this out, you can completely throw that out. It doesn't need to be this big. It doesn't need to be oriented this way. It doesn't need to be laid out this way. It needs to communicate
be higher, and it needs
that I'm
to be
high
colder.
and I'm cold. And if we can communicate that, then you can change all sorts of stuff to work with the problems that we're facing right now. And so bad design is usually uncritical design, because in my mind, if you are not thinking about needs and constraints, you aren't designing. You're just making. And I don't mean that entirely pejoratively, but a little bit pejoratively. Like, design involves the process of laying out goals and constraints. Like, that's so fundamental to in any industry, game design, industrial design, furniture design,
Yeah, it actually
graphic
comes
design.
from architecture, from disegno, from Italian, I think.
Yeah,
that
and
means
I
to lay out, to graphically show something.
yes, and if you, I really like a lot of mid-century modern furniture and architecture, and so I listened to a talk or an interview with Charles Eames, and he said basically the root of everything goes back to needs and constraints. Like, what are you trying to do, and what are your limitations, and that's what you're working within. That's what design is, and if you're not reconciling, or if you're not working within that, if you're not thinking and talking about that, I don't really think you're designing. I think you're just making stuff.
Okay, so because I'm going to sidetrack a bit of what you said, I think Norman, like the author of The Design of Everyday Things, said that good design is the design that you actually don't see, and you don't even notice and that you experience something, because it was so intuitive that you actually just skipped a bit with your mind, and you did something and you didn't even acknowledge it.
Yes.
Would you say that it could also that we could take that definition and put it into the game design, or?
Yes, absolutely. I think that this also goes, there's another Eames quote that's very closely related, which I believe it was Charles Eames who said, a good designer is like a good party host who addresses the needs of
the guests
before they realize that they have them. So before a guest realizes they're thirsty, there's a drink for them. Before they realize that the temperature is getting cool, it's already warmed up a little bit. Before they realize they're hungry, dinner is being served. All of these things are being done.
That's an amazing party also.
Yeah, it's an amazing party. But that's the idea, is if you hit the point where the player, in our case, where the player is actively thinking about what they're doing, the design kind of broke down. You want people to do things in a way that's...
Unless you want them to...
Sure, unless that's the goal. That's the goal, yeah. But I think that when people kind of stop and go how does this work in a way that's unintentional, and this always happens where it's very common now to watch people play the games that you make. Play testers, focus testers, devs. You watch them remotely.
Streamers.
That's the easiest way. But the other thing too is Microsoft, not to plug the company that owns Obsidian now, but Microsoft, human research, they'll do things where they'll show the hands on the controller when someone is playing, and you can see what they're trying. You can see the physical exploration of the interface or the keyboard and mouse. You can see what they're trying to do when they're doing it, and it's so educational for seeing how people stumble with the things that you try to get them to go through.
I've actually read that it would be awesome if each gaming company actually recorded the faces of the testers as well, because each time they frown, each time they say something under their breath or make a face, it's way more information that you can see on the screen or even on their hands. And I find this fascinating.
Yeah, Microsoft has what they're obviously the game, their face, their hands, and then they also have a controller diagram that actually lights up so you can see not just what it looks like they're doing, but what they're actually doing, which I think is just incredible. It gives you such a wide range of information. But I think going back to your original question, this idea of invisible design, it's really people don't want to, I mean, I shouldn't say don't, but most people, when they play a game, they don't want to see the strings. They don't want to see the dice actually rolling. They want to see their action taking place. Yeah. Yes, they want to do the stuff and they want to interact in that way, and they want to.
Although Disco Elysium had amazing dice roll mechanics, so maybe sometimes it works.
I'll disagree on that. No, I mean I've said this real explicitly before. Disco Elysium is an incredible game. should be used as a new standard for how reactive dialogue can work in games. I really do not like the dice mechanic.
You even don't like the sound?
The sound is fine, but I mean, like, I have high standards for the sound of dice rolling, so it's fine. Like, the way that it's presented is great. How it actually interacts with player expectations, I don't think is great. And you know, the devs have responded and say, well, that's intentional, and I'm like, okay, cool. I still don't like it.
Was
so
it on
fine.
Twitter, Josh?
What's that?
Was the conversation on Twitter?
I mean, it was partially on Twitter and partially on YouTube, because I did my talk on reputation systems and mechanics, and it somehow came up in that context, and yeah. But like I said, people can like different things. I don't even know where we were going with that.
You were talking about invisible design, and I was talking about the dice rolls, so that's why I come here.
Well, and but that also goes to something else that gets into a real, like, weird space, especially with RNG, random number generation. So Disco actually lets you use Disco Elysium. It's a perfect example. If I invest very highly in a skill in Disco Elysium, and I get a check, and that check shows a 96% chance of success.
And you roll the dice.
And you roll the dice and you blow it. It doesn't matter really that it's actually technically fair or not. What matters is that it feels shitty.
You must love XCOM then.
Well, no, I mean, but that's why that feels like shit. I mean, like, I've told this experience before where, because here's the thing is, we build these characters in a way to reflect core proficiencies and skills. Like, I'm good at this thing. And in aggregate, let's say, you can say the dice, probabilistically, with enough instances, yes, you're good at that. You will win most checks. It is specifically the very easy checks that you fail that feel so shitty because they so violently contradict the basic concept of your character being good at the thing they just failed at. So whether it's, you know, I have massive investment in the skill in Disco Elysium and I fail a conceptualization roll, or in actually here's a better example in XCOM, because it's both character building.
But sorry, but when you think about Disco Elysium, you're playing this really beat up drunkard, that can be like really good at conceptualization, but he's also like a very a human being at the bottom, let's say. So maybe, you know, it's sometimes like he just doesn't even if he knows something, maybe, you know, he has like this brain block or something like that. So it actually kind of makes sense in the story. The mechanics like still work, even though you have like 96%. But maybe you just like, you know, I'm an art history major. Maybe I will forget about Picasso in a talk when I'm really feeling bad or drunk or hungover, right? But and it's like that is really basic stuff. Like I should know.
Yes, that is a post facto rationalization that does not get that does not get rid of the fact that it feels like shit when you fail that check.
Does, and it did, and I remember it. But still, like, Disco Elysium is also kind of a game about feeling shitty. Sure,
I mean, again, like, I can say that. I will not say that it's an invalid choice or that it's wrong or anything like that. You know, in XCOM,
you just don't like it. Okay.
I don't like it. It doesn't feel good. Like in XCOM, to give another example, because it's both. In XCOM, you have both character building and strategizing. So, or tactical application. So, you have a confluence of things where I have built my character, quote unquote, right. I've equipped them right.
And they even have a nickname.
I have placed them where they should be. I have set up my Overwatches in the textbook perfect way to set them up. And I actually had, in the last mission of XCOM, Enemy Unknown, I had a case that is so absurd that, again, it just sounds ridiculous, where I set up 5 characters on Overwatch, and I had a scout run out and run back, She provoked a alien.
Mm-hmm.
The alien ran in, 5 characters with 95% chance to hit, fired and missed. And then he shot at the character that was farthest away, critically hit her and killed her. And it's a case where it's like...
Did you rage quit?
Well, I reloaded and threw a grenade, which is even more absurd because what happens is you just shatter the entire illusion of what you're doing. Like, I have an elite crew of experienced, veteran, well-built, well-equipped, tactically sound characters that I have deployed in the perfect way. But what I have to do to get past this is reload and do something stupid that is not tactically sound, which is throw a grenade to get around the meta of the seeded RNG, and it feels shitty. So again, you can explain and rationalize why that all works that way, but in the moment, the experience for the player is, this is fucking bullshit. And they don't feel like XCOM is cool. I love this. I love that this is how this works. They think, wow, this RNG, like they think the RNG is broken. They think that it's not a positive experience. If your goal is to say, I want you to feel that, well then congratulations, you did it. But I don't think that's actually what they were trying to get the player to feel. So
this is an abstract question, Josh.
Okay.
Let's say you had a time machine and you can go back in time to whatever, like from 71, like say upwards to our time, and you can stop a person from making a design decision that actually is used to nowadays, but it's actually a bad decision that was made some time ago, but it's already like here, we are using it, and you think it could be better. Like, what would you stop?
I don't think that it's that big of a deal anymore, but if I could somehow, and I don't even know where I could find the inception point. Jeez. I really don't like attribute systems in most role-playing games, and one of the least enjoyable for me are Dungeons and Dragons attributes. I just think that we continue to sort of try to carry over strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, charisma, or some variant of that.
Like
with
the
these
special.
Well, special is very different though. Special actually feels different enough that I think it's totally fine. But it's that specific D&D-ish emulation of those ranges that wind up getting used. I mean, there was a big frustration for me on Pillars of Eternity. I don't think they're particularly enjoyable or interesting. In some ways, I just don't like I actually, for whatever beefs I had with Mass Effect's combat, I actually really liked that they basically just didn't have attributes. They're like, no, like, that's not a part of the design. It doesn't matter. It's totally fine. Like, I don't think that RPGs should not have attributes. I just think that the fact that we continually kind of, even in Pillars of Eternity and Deadfire, continue to sort of just use the design of attributes that has existed in D&D for decades
seems pretty
is not
fundamental. Like,
yeah,
it seems like if you have a kind of a twist on it, or you deliberately not use it, it's just so like it really seems like you do it on purpose. Like you have something to say while not using that. So maybe I when you said attributes, I didn't even it didn't even click. It was like so fundamental for me. So so you would stop this from happening. Okay.
Yeah, or so, try to push away from it in some way more strongly earlier. I just feel like,
so just maybe adding a note like,
hey, try something else.
yeah, don't reuse this for forever,
forever. Although I admit I'm part of the problem because Pillars and Deadfire did it too. But yeah, I don't know. It feels like there's still players still kind of expect it to be there, and like you said, if you mess with it in any significant amount, they get real bent out of shape about it. I don't know.
Because it was always there. Like,
yeah,
as I said, when I'm starting a new RPG, like even better if it's like an old school RPG, like nowadays.
Yes.
Like I'm expecting it to be there.
Yeah.
So tell me and tell the audience, how do you think how to design games to actually support the player? Like how to think about the player and not for them. Like, how to make those aha moments for the player, but actually like design them to be there.
Yeah, it's very tricky. I do think that part of it, it's a delicate balance. If you always do the obvious thing, then players want to be surprised.
They want to be challenged, I think.
They want to be challenged. They want to be surprised. I think that if you find ways to surprise and challenge the player with your content while using all the core mechanics, and especially if you wind up giving them ways to do unusual or surprising things. Mm-hmm. Like this goes back to the idea that I said before of we have to pre-script everything. So there's you will have simulative games that are more like Prey, where it's really about...
I was thinking Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, for example. You could
Sure.
You have like a set of core mechanics that you can use like however you want.
Yes. But even, I mean, it seems weird to sort of compare Legend of Zelda and Prey, but really there's a fundamental tool and simulative thing there where you're given tools that have big physical impacts on the world. And some of that stuff, like in Zelda, is pre-structured, but you can also use those tools in a lot of very creative ways to do nutty stuff. That's not usually what the sort of games that I work on do. Usually what we try to do is, for example, in the design of RPG mechanics, letting the combat mechanics be open and flexible enough that people can do things like say, I want to make a party of all rangers with bears. I want to do it solo. I want to have a party of just paladins and clerics or priests. I want a party of all Orlans, or like whatever goofy sort of thing that they want to do. Or like, I'm going to do just fire spells, and making the combat system and the encounters flexible enough where it may be challenging to get through if you put these certain weird restrictions. Some things will be easy, some things will be challenging, but the system is mechanically open in a way where you can interface with it in that way. When it comes to content and reactivity, I do think it's very important to think about exceptional use cases or weird use cases. For example, in Fallout New Vegas, there's a quest called Flags of Our Foul-Ups, where there's a bunch of very bad, incompetent soldiers who they're trying to train to be better, and you can go through all these training drills and things with them. Or I think you can use your medicine skill to kind of diagnose some of their problems. And then if you have a lot of psycho, the combat drug, you can say like, just take this. They're like, take this drug and you'll be great. And they're like, what, really? And you're like, yeah, just take it all. I think it's something like 10 doses. It's a lot. It's very unlikely that the player will have that. So when you allow them to complete the quest in that way, it feels kind of organic. It feels like a thing where a player might say, I'm just going to give them a combat drug. I'm just going to get them all pumped up and let them go into combat. And it's that combination of, yeah, sure, I should be able to use combat skills to train them and make them better. Oh, and I can use my medicine skill to diagnose some of their like psychological problems. That's cool. And also, if I have a shitload of this drug, I can just give them drugs. And then the way that plays out in the end is quite different. Like, if you give them the combat chems, they basically become war criminals. Like, they go nuts in combat, and they wind up being executed for war crimes. You completed the quest, and you did it the way that you
way
wanted.
Way to go!
So I don't know if I answered your question really, but I do think keeping in mind all those sort of fun moments and different ways that players can express their, for me, that's usually what I'm thinking about. I would also say, even though it's not simulative, the way that Fallout New Vegas's main quest is designed for players to do things out of order if they want. So you can follow the quest from Good Springs down to Prim, and then around to Nipton and up to Novak, and then up to Boulder City, and then to the Strip. But you can also just go straight to the Strip, or you can go through Scorpion Gulch and get to Novak. You can do all sorts of crazy things in a crazy order, and you don't just accidentally do that as designers. I said from the beginning, you have to be able to go straight from Good Springs to Benny. It should be very hard, which is why there are Deathclaws and Cazadores and super mutants north. But I said you have to be able to do it. The story has to make sense. That has to be possible. And leaving that open for the player is why, again, the player feels such a sense of freedom in New Vegas, because I just said from the beginning, this has to be how it works. Everything has to be done to support this. And all the designers did it. They did a great job.
It's a very good game.
Thanks.
So, you already know that, I think. A huge fan base.
Yes.
Also, tell me then, what about the players that actually want to ruin the game? Let's say by cheating, not by like trying to play what they want to play. I know that you took some precautions in Fallout New Vegas to not let them cheat. So I know that you know that the players will try to ruin the game.
Yeah.
Somehow. So what about them? Should you make them avoid trying to break it, or just let them go free and go bananas?
I think especially in the case of a single player game, the expectations are very different from multiplayer. My personal belief is that anything that is within the confines of the game that's not like accessing the console is part of the game and should be considered part of the core mechanics, which includes save load. So, for example, I don't care about a player hitting tilde, opening the console in Fallout New Vegas, and just adding caps into their inventory.
You don't care about that?
I don't care.
All?
No, because because there's a certain layer of... There's a barrier there that players understand that they're crossing. I think most players understand that if they start
most players don't want to cheat.
I think they understand that when they're editing data files, or if they're accessing the console, that they've crossed a line that is kind of meta. Even the console, when the console comes down, it's like a window has been lowered or raised over the game for them to screw around, and they understand that they've taken a step out of it. When someone saves and loads, I don't think that's there. When someone saves and loads, that's part of the game. That is really truly a part of the game. And you
go out to the menu, to the pause menu, right?
You do, but I really feel that there's something fundamentally different between lowering a console and going to the main menu.
I know what you mean, but yeah. I'm still looking for for the barrier, But continue. Sorry.
Yeah, I think that is. I think it's when you start accessing tools outside of the context. I really feel that the console breaks it. Anyway,
the save and load.
Save and load. So save and load, and save scumming is really, really common. So I'm not going to get mad at players for save scumming, because we designed the game that lets them save scum. Why be mad at the players? You have to... Let me put it this way. You don't ever have to access the console to play the game.
Yes, you don't have to.
You don't have to. You almost certainly have to save and load.
Or
the player...
you can just straight up play, I don't know, 100 hours.
You could. Yes. It's unlikely. It's very, very, very unlikely. So... with gambling in the casinos, because it's randomized, save scumming is the immediate instinct that everybody has, right? They're like,
yeah, you play some caps, you lose them, so you just load. So
yes,
you save
and
before, and then you load.
How do I win the game? And in the case of roulette or slots, it's brainless. Like there's no, it's just chance.
Just random. Yeah.
It's just random. So blackjack, there is strategy there, but like with those other two games, it's nothing. Which, you know, they were put in there because they were simple. They didn't require AI. You just roll. So that being said, though, I was like, well, the only way to do better at the game is just to try it again. And if you can reload your game, then that's a better way to do it. So I put in the anti-cheating measure, which just said like, it's like 45 seconds or something like that. And a patient player can still do it, but I don't care at that point. If a player really wants to wait a minute between each attempt, okay, that's fine. I don't think most people do. I think most people want to just be like, yibbity-doo, and like roll it. And they're like, hey, I won. Hey, I lost.
That's the sound I'm making
That's
when I
the sound
play
that they
roulette.
make. And so I don't really care about single-player cheating, but I do think that the thrill of a randomized game like that goes way down when it becomes about saving and loading, because it feels, I don't know, it just feels crummy. So I don't care about a person just adding caps directly into their inventory. But for a person to feel the sort of tension and the thrill of a roulette and not just save load, that's why there's that buffer there, is so that they're like, oh, okay, like save scumming is not really super effective or fun or time efficient. It's certainly not time efficient. So if I want to play the game, then I'm just going to play the game. If I want more caps, you can just add caps directly in your inventory if you want.
Okay, so you are not like for making the single player game as bulletproof as possible, so the player doesn't cheat.
There's no point.
So just let them have fun.
Just let them have fun. But again, I guess that's what it kind of comes down to, is like with save scumming. Save scumming it's never fun, but it's effective.
It is.
And seeing a roulette wheel spin and seeing the ball bounce around is fun. Like that is actually an enjoyable thing. Like I don't like gambling, but I like watching a slot machine. I like watching a roulette wheel. It's exciting.
Like looking at things that spin around.
It's fun, sure. They're flashing, they're colorful. Where will it land?
Designed to be like that, you know.
Yes,
because
of course.
When you put your money in, they do that, and that's fun.
Yes. So I would rather have people keep the tension and the focus on the spectacle that's designed to do that, rather than save load, try it again, look away. Did I win? No. Save load, try it again. We're going for something experiential. I mean, this all comes back to this idea of we're creating experiences for people. The experience of gambling at roulette, if it turns into looking at save load screens, that's not the experience that we try to create for the player. So, yeah, like I don't care about people cheating, but I do think that if you can, not in a means of being punitive, if you can incentivize people to experience the content, you know, in the way that is most enjoyable and creates the experience that you want, then try to do that. So I don't think it's as about anti-cheating as much as just, it goes back to that XCOM thing. Like, I want to set up my perfect line of guys and have the perfect Overwatch thing go off. I don't want to load my game and then throw a grenade to reset the RNG. Like, that just feels goofy. That's
dirty.
Not the
that feels dirty.
It feels dirty and weird, and like it doesn't feel like my party is a bunch of highly trained tactical badasses. It feels like I'm meta, because that's what I'm doing. I'm metagaming the system because I can't get the results that I want.
It also actually sounds like at the beginning of an action movie, like you have like an alien going through a line of 5 highly skilled people and all of them miss.
Yeah.
That's kind
like,
of a cool
all right.
sequence.
Yep.
Okay, so please share with us a design decision that you yourself made are really proud of.
That I'm very proud of. Very proud of.
I actually have here most proud of, but let's say you are
most proud of. Ooh. I do think there's a high-level decision I made on Fallout New Vegas to remove all perks that granted skill bonuses, which might sound like pretty mild, but there was a significant number of perks in Fallout 3 that just granted bonuses to skills. And I said, nope, like, I want to redesign. I want to take all these out, and I want to design only perks that give benefits that are orthogonal to the skills themselves, or that they overlap multiple things. And I think it makes the process of selecting perks more enjoyable and meaningful, because if I like buy skill points and then I buy a perk that basically just grants me more skill points, that doesn't feel that interesting. If I buy skill up and then I get and I buy my barter up and then I get a perk that makes all things that weigh less than 2 pounds have their weight. Whoa. Like, now I can carry like so many more little teeny things. Or if I buy a perk that makes the weight of all weapons over 10 pounds cut in half. Whoa.
Now
Cool.
it can be
like,
an armory.
Now I can carry like I can carry all the missile launchers and crazy shit like that. So yeah, like I feel like that was, at first people were like, whoa, you're cutting perks, like you're taking stuff out of the game. And there were some people that were like, you can't just remove stuff. And I'm like, well, does it really feel good to pick those things? I don't think that it does. So I think it's totally fine to remove them as long as we put in stuff that players say like, oh yeah, like cool, like my character feels actually different for having taken this, rather than just like, okay, I have more skill points. Or even something where it seems like there's a lot of overlap, like Cowboy or Grunt, where Cowboy, it's like, well, it gives bonuses with lever actions, revolvers, dynamite, and knives. And that covers the guns skill technically, the explosive skill technically, and the melee skill. But not all of them. It covers a subset of themed, and this is why I think I really like those perks in the end, because you start role playing. I'm a cowboy.
Yeah, it's actually sounds really role play when you pick them.
And like when you look at the Pip Boy or the Vault Boy, Brian Menzies did a great job of capturing the spirit of it, and it reinforces the fantasy you have. Yeah, I'm a wasteland cowboy, and I throw dynamite, and I shoot my lever action rifle, and I wear a cowboy hat. I mean, and that's why we put other stuff like that in the game, so that you can dress yourself to match the. Some people will disparagingly say that it's sort of like dress up Dolly or whatever, and it's like, well, the visual appearance of your character helps to reinforce the mechanical concept, and vice versa, and like they go together.
Those guys have never like played LARPs. Like,
maybe,
never.
But yeah, I think that they work together, and it's cool when the visualization of your character matches the concept and also the mechanical stuff, and it all works together. It's a good feeling.
I actually, when I was playing New Vegas, I loved Boone so much that I had like my whole outfit was his outfit actually.
Wow!
And I actually have the beret, like in real life. So yeah, that was. I actually cannot understand people that tell you like dressing up in RPGs isn't like meaningful in any way. It's really meaningful. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry for sharing.
No, you can share whatever you want. Your show.
I know that you did the game like way before that you had like a really short time to finish.
Yep.
And I'm talking about Icewind Dale 2.
Yep.
How long did like the process of making this game take?
It actually took 10 months.
Okay, so I know that you had like about 4 months to finish the story there.
Oh no, that's not right.
I said that in an interview.
No,
So
I
you
had
lied.
no, I had we had 4 months to make the whole game. I had 48 hours with, and I shouldn't say it was just me. Steve Bacchus and I had 48 hours to develop the story overview and a high-level description of all
Okay.
of the areas of the game.
48
So-
hours.
48 hours.
10 months
So-
to finish a whole game.
Yeah, so initially it was 48 hours and 4 months, and then it became 9 months, and then it became 10 months. Although, I mean, I never thought that it was going to be done in 4 months anyway. I was pretty confident it was going to be a year, but we got it done in 10 months. But yeah, like Steve and I did get the story and the area overviews done in 48 hours, and then everyone just started designing it, and
Did
you
you
know,
guys sleep or did it
yeah, we
actually
did.
take-
There were a lot of
quite
people that worked themselves way too hard. There were a couple of devs that left the industry after the game because it burned them out. You know, I'm glad that some people had fun with the game that we made, but it was made under very dire circumstances, and people really burned themselves out making it. So I don't like how we had to make it. And yeah.
Okay, I just wanted because when I read it, I cannot imagine making a game like in 10, 4 or whatever months right now.
Yeah.
Like the
Yeah.
whole game with a team. I cannot like imagine it. So when I read about it, I was like, yeah, I'm going to ask Josh about it because this can't be true.
It actually became a big component of a lot of the games that I made in my career, because Icewind Dale 1 was made in 14 months. Icewind Dale 2 was made in 10 months. Fallout New Vegas was made in 18 months. I mean, honestly, Fallout New Vegas is the craziest one. Like, at least
Yeah.
with Icewind Dale 2, at least we knew the engine pretty well. With Fallout New Vegas, we didn't know that engine at all. Like,
I
we really
actually
were just...
Have a review copy of New Vegas, and the thing is, it's not patched, so
Baby.
yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing
Rough
what you can
stuff.
see. Okay, so let's discuss IPs. Tell me, like, if you had a chance to work on any IP ever existing, if it's like ongoing or if it's long dead or if it just had like one instance, what would you choose?
I wouldn't pick an existing IP.
You would make a new one.
Yeah, like for almost my entire career, I've worked on other IPs, and that's fine and it's fun and it can be cool, but like I literally just do not think in those terms anymore. I want to make specific games, and usually those specific games are not attached to any IP. Either they could be the start of a new IP, or they could just be a standalone game. But that's usually how I think about it. Like when I got into the industry, all I really wanted to do was make a Dungeons and Dragons game and a Fallout game.
And you succeeded in
I already did that.
both
So
those goals. Yeah, okay.
And there are other IPs that I've been like, oh, that could be cool, but as time has gone on, I just don't want to do that. I
Okay,
just don't.
that's a good answer actually, and I'm really happy that you said
Thanks.
that. So you have been a game designer since like forever. Can you tell me what changed in the industry? Like, what was once better than it is now?
That was better than it is now?
Yeah, that's the twist in the question.
Yeah, what was once better than it is now? I don't know if there was a ton of stuff that was better. Well, I guess I would say that maybe there was a little more room for a while, just for a short while. There was a little more room to just kind of make stuff without everything being focus tested and without the budgets being blown through the roof. But that being said, that's come back in some ways. Like indie development, you can make games for much less than $1 million. You know, like
Yeah.
it could be a single person can do that. But there was a dark period, I want to say, like in the mid 2000s, where no publishers wanted to publish smaller games. No publishers wanted to publish niche games. Excuse me. Everyone wanted to do blockbusters.
That's why the indie and the middle like shelf games started coming out, right? Because there was no market for that before.
Well, I mean, that and digital distribution. Without digital distribution, it never ever would have happened.
And good like access to the internet and to good internet at that.
Of course. I don't really think there was a lot back then that was better, to be honest. Representation was way worse. Dealing with retailers was way worse. Like, man,
not being able to patch some games after
not
release.
Being able to patch, like, yeah, it's really, really rough. I think for the most part, it's just better now.
Okay, so tell us what changed, like, what's better now than it was before.
A much wider range of games. I mean, this is also, I guess, a double-edged sword. There are so many games. Like, it's unbelievable how many games there are. Like, every year on Steam, the number of games that come out is unbelievable.
Like, every day on Steam right now. There are, thousands of games coming out, like, every day, so you can't even have, like, a chance to know about them. I remember a time when I knew, like, when the indie scene was happening, like, you know, after Braid and stuff, each, like, this middle shelf game that came out, I knew about it. I didn't play everyone, like, I didn't play each, but I knew that this game existed. What was it like? What was like important in it? Right now, I don't have any idea, even like in my interests, like what's happening. When I go to Steam, each time I see a new game I want to play, I don't have time for it.
Yeah, it's a bummer.
And what about like developer and work-wise? What's better now?
Developer and work-wise, crunch is better. It's hard to quantify that, though. It's hard to quantify that because we have surveys about crunch, but even those surveys only quantify so much. Like, what does crunch mean to you? How long are you, like, all that sort of stuff. I think crunch is better. I think that representation in general in development is better. Like, you have a wider range of ages, you have wider range of gender, sexual orientation, ethnicity, nationality, perspectives, educational backgrounds, like all that stuff, I think is just better now. When I got into dev in 1999 at Black Isle, there were no female developers at Black Isle, period, in the whole company. You know, there still aren't a ton in development, but it is much better than it was. You know, when I started...
I can agree on that, actually.
Yeah. When I started at Black Isle, I would hear people say homophobic things, like just openly in the workplace, which was very jarring to me. And I'm not the most courageous person, but even back then I said, like, you can't say shit like that. Like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, it just seemed bizarre, but people were, the workplace could be homophobic. And I think overall that is much better. We still have a long way to go in a lot of ways. I really do think, though, that going back to the idea of so many games is that there are so many types of games now. Like, I remember one of the things when, I don't remember if it was Gone Home or probably Gone Home, which I should say, friends of mine worked on that game, so I'm hardly unbiased, but people were really bent out of shape. They're like, you don't do anything in this game, you just walk around.
Yeah, is this even a game?
Is it even a game? Here's my answer. Who fucking cares? Like, what do you care? You have thousands of games to play. You have, like, there are so many games that you will never play because you literally can't do it. It's boggles my mind that anyone can be that upset that a game they don't like exists, because we are flooded with games. It's incredible. Like, there are, it's just nuts. So ultimately, I think we've moved past that point where people are resisting, like, I don't like that these aren't even games. It doesn't matter. Like, let it go. like every
sometimes
day.
matter. It's something I can tell you like one context where it matters, and it's academics.
Okay.
When you have to like make a methodological point where you like draw the line from I'm focusing on games, so those things are not games, but
Sure.
those things are games.
Okay.
Then it's kind of hard, you know, to distinguish a game from a non-game. There's actually a quote, I don't remember from whom, like when you ask someone what's a game, it's kind of hard to describe, but you actually when you play a game, you know you're playing a game.
Sure. I think, well, and people even debate that, but from my perspective, as a person who is not in academia, and who makes them, like, I don't care. I don't care, and I don't care to engage in conversations about it. Like, you know, I think most people don't engage in this shit anymore, but, you know, back when the R games art, and I got asked in a few interviews.
Yes, there was
like,
a debate like that. I just remembered that there was actually a debate
it's
about
crazy.
that.
And I got asked in a few interviews, like, what's your stance? And I said, I do not give a shit. I was like,
You
I don't
did not
care.
say that. You weren't that rude.
Yes, I was. I said, I don't
Okay.
care. I said, I don't give a shit. It's completely irrelevant. I'm like, what? I was like, what does talking about it accomplish? Like, does it make it more or less art? Like, make the thing. I'm going to make the stuff that I want to make. And some people will say this is art and other people won't. I don't care. It's fun. Like, it's just, what a waste of time to talk about it. And in the context of making games, again, there's an audience that I'm making a thing for. Are those people going to enjoy the experience of the thing that I've made? And are they going to be satisfied with it? That's the thing that I really care about. Past that, if they say it's a game or not, I don't fucking care. I seriously do not care at all. I mean, I've worked on a bunch of games that it would be very weird, I think, if people were to say that something like Fallout New Vegas or Pillars of Eternity is not a game. But if they did, I would kind of laugh and be like, all right, like it's just, like, why even debate it? It doesn't matter. If you're in academia and it's a topic of like actual discussion that needs to be resolved within the context of academia, that's fine. But as a person who works in the field, it doesn't matter to me at all. Like, I don't care how you define any of this shit. I don't care if you define it as art or not, as a gamer or not, what
If you
genre
could
or
choose,
subgenre.
how would you like people to define the things you make?
I don't care.
Okay.
No, I just don't. Like, I mean, I can say as games, as role-playing games, I think what I make are games and role-playing games. I'm also not... and that happens too. Like, someone will say, like, a first-person game, like a first-person shooter can't be a role-playing game. Okay. All right. Like, who cares? Sure. I don't care. I just... What a waste of time to even argue about it. Like, I can just say, like, okay, I disagree, but farewell,
Okay.
traveler. Like, you know, it's like you've seen the cartoon of the angel, the guy yelling saying I don't like thing, and then an angel comes down with a piece of paper that says okay and just flies away.
Yeah.
That's how I feel about that stuff. It's like, sure.
You do
Like,
you, guy.
I'm gonna move on with my life, and it doesn't really affect me because I'm the person making the stuff. So if you want to call it not a game or not a role-playing game, it doesn't really matter to me unless
It doesn't change anything in the game also.
No. Yeah, so.
Okay. So we're getting close to the finish, and I have some questions from, let's say, the audience. Like, people
Okay.
wanted me to ask you questions, and I picked some of them because you actually get asked a bunch of questions, like, constantly. The way I see the interviews, a lot of people ask you the same kind of questions, so I picked those ones that I think are interesting. And the first one is actually for me. So,
The ultimate audience.
yeah, I'm the best of audience there is. So, since we actually talked a bunch about your career right now, tell me, who would you be if you weren't like the design director at Obsidian or even a game designer? Like, you have, like, you can pick all of the fields that are, and you just like automatically switch your profession, who would you be?
Man, that's a really hard question. So we're not talking about alternate timeline. You're saying right now I have to pick a different life.
Yeah.
I think I would say, although I bet I would regret it later, is a bicycle frame builder. So, I like bicycles not just as things to ride and things to collect, but I also got into restoring bicycles, especially vintage bicycles. And I also built my own bike frame out of steel, tubing, and lugs, and brass, brazing. And it's deceptively simple in some ways, but it's one of those things that obviously there are craftspeople who spend a lifetime becoming better and better bicycle frame builders. And it's something where design is still extremely important. The user is extremely important. The needs are extremely important. There's a lot of thought and consideration that goes into
making
the structure. The structural design, they're very artistic. There are so many artistic choices that go into making bicycles. Even making one bicycle frame, though, and having restored probably about 20 bicycles, it's backbreaking. It's really hard labor.
But it's also like manual, so it has to be like super
it is extremely satisfying. Yeah, it's very satisfactory.
Yeah, that
satisfying.
was, yeah.
Yeah, it is. But I also know, like, I have arthritis in one of my thumbs, and when I was building that frame, my hand was just killing me, and I'm like, man, if I actually tried to do this as a career now, that would be rough. But I think that's something like I still, even though I kind of drift from hobby to hobby, and I'm kind of dilettantish in a lot of ways. Like, a lot of people will say, like, I am interested in all these things. I am a Renaissance man. And I'm like, I'm not. I'm a dilettante. Like, I'm not an expert.
You just like prove that you're like, you were doing drama, music, you were doing illustration, you are writing, and you are designing, and you know technical stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, you're not Renaissance at all. Like,
well, it goes to sort of the depth of knowledge where it's I'm superficially knowledgeable and kind of competent at a lot of these things, but not necessarily that great.
Yeah, that's what people actually usually mean when they say that they are like a Renaissance man. Like, it's not like they have like PhD in all the fields. They know a little bit of everything.
Yeah, but I will call myself a dilettante. But bicycle frame building is a thing that I feel like I would be competent at, and I think my aesthetic choices are pretty good. And
what would you name your shop?
I made one bicycle and it was called Sawyer Cycles, which I know is very boring, but that's what it is. That's the label on the bike.
I think it's cute.
Thanks. But yeah, I think I would probably, if I had to leave gaming, I think I would try to get into frame building, which maybe in my mid-40s would not be great, but I know that there are guys that have done it, gotten into it, and women who have gotten into it into their 30s, so maybe I could do it in my 40s. You
don't actually have to quit the industry.
Not
please
today,
don't, because
but we'll see.
If you do, like the people, like if you do quit after this interview, people will just like find me and there will be a lynch. So just don't.
It's not Iga's fault. If I leave, it's not Iga's fault.
Okay, thank you. We have this recorded. Okay, so tell me, in your opinion, okay, I'm just going to read the question. What makes a character interesting? Because the person that asked me to ask you the question says that Obsidian, your characters, but also Obsidian writers' characters, especially the ones that are not like really main, so just NPCs, feel human and feel like as friends for the player rather than just random NPCs just running around. And what needs to be done to achieve this depth of the character?
It's a good question, because some of this I feel is intuitive.
Thank you. I have asked you really good questions.
Yes, very good job. It's it's hard to say exactly because a lot of this is intuitive. It's sort of like it feels right, less conscious. I do think that we always try when we define an NPC even in a document, which is very sterile, but usually what I ask for is keywords to describe the character. I'll ask for 6 keywords: greedy, boisterous,
How would
lecherous.
you describe yourself?
Let's not get into that right now.
Okay.
But 6 words to kind of capture
The essence,
the essence of the character. Now, depending on what game it is, how important they are, there might be other things that go along with that. So, for example, in Pillars and Deadfire, we do a lot of prose writing. So we write descriptive text about furrowing their brow, or gestures that they do with their hands, or whatever. So I remember at one point in time, we had this character, Dario, in Deadfire that Carrie Patel was writing, and Carrie was my co-narrative lead. She did a ton of writing on Pillars 1, and she was my co-narrative lead on Deadfire. And Carrie was having some challenges developing the character. There were some technical challenges with the character because Dario ties into 3 quests, which is usually not a great... Structurally, it creates a lot of problems. And she was like, I'm having trouble kind of defining this character, and I'm finding the voice and this meaningful stuff. And we came up with this idea in his backstory about him having once been a great pirate who irreparably damaged his legs in a fall from the rigging. And he so he couldn't walk, and he did some fiddling with his legs, and he had some braces on his legs and some other things, and he occupied his time by doing sewing basically. And we had reasoned that he developed that from repairing sails, and that was his job, or at least one of his jobs. And so when you talk to him, I don't remember all the details, but basically throughout the conversation, he's occupied with this activity of sewing this thing. And it comes into his emotional state, it starts to reflect that. And I think even at one point, depending on how the conversation goes with him, I think he eventually actually gives you a gift of something that he sewed. But he's a crime boss. He's a really crazy crime boss living in this weird dungeon in the Undercity. And so it was this combination of idiosyncratic traits and his personal background and part of it is because I think when he started, or when Carrie started, there was a lot of spider imagery and a lot of steepling of fingers, and it felt to me, I was like, this feels like a character I've seen a lot. And I'm the crime boss, I'm at the center of my web, I'm a spider, and I was like, I think we can probably do more with the character. And so obviously when you write, especially when you write in fantasy, there are genre conventions you don't want to completely throw out the window, because if you go too far, which I certainly have been accused of going too far, players feel like, well, now this doesn't even feel like fantasy, or it doesn't feel like the fantasy that I want. But if all you do is stick to the genre conventions, you don't surprise and intrigue the player.
Yeah,
you don't you don't create the sense of discovery and warmth and the real character underneath. And I think Carrie did a great job with how she wound up writing Dario. And it was because of that conscious effort to rethink the character in terms of his background and personal mannerisms and peculiarities that really made him feel very interesting. And obviously not every NPC can get that level of attention, but for us, we were like, Dario is so central to so many quests, and his prominence in this community is so high that we need to really make him memorable. So yeah, sometimes, there's characters like Sansa at Sansa's Emporium. A lot of people really grab it. I think Paul Kirsch maybe wrote Sansa, or maybe it was Yeah, I can't remember exactly. But another really memorable, cute little character who has lots of little idiosyncratic things that they do that make them memorable. And obviously, if you take it too far, they become caricatures and ridiculous. But if you do it a little bit and make them colorful and memorable, then they're just a cool character that you remember.
Okay. This is from the same person who, and I must add this, thinks Pillars of Eternity 2 is a really great game. He's the co-host of my show. He talked about the Pillars of Eternity 2 in great detail, and I would describe him as a pusher of the game, actually.
Nice. Thank you.
So, and he wants you, I don't know if you can actually answer the question, so just tell me if you cannot. Maybe there's like an NDA thing or something, but
sure.
He actually believes that everything in Pillars of Eternity 2 is better than the first part, which he also loved. Cool. And he wants me to ask you, why do you think it wasn't a huge success sales-wise?
It's a topic of great debate on the internet, where everybody is positive. And I wrote a big Tumblr, or maybe not that big. I wrote a Tumblr post where I said and it was fairly close to the launch of the game, and I was pretty upset by how it performed commercially. So there's some so let me say there are things that I think are certainly not great about the game that I'm responsible for. The difficulty of the game at launch, I'm totally responsible for that. The story and the structure of the story, I'm completely responsible for that. The pacing of the story, I'm completely responsible for that. The companion interaction system, how reputations work, also completely responsible for that. Those are all bad things. Ship-to-ship combat, I've said this before, I'm partially responsible for that. That's also something that my boss, Fergus, insisted go into the game. I thought that it should be cut. It became a backer goal, and so then it needed to be in the game. I understand, I wanted to cut it. So I understand why people don't like it. We were deep enough into it that we had to continue with the current implementation, and it was not good, and a lot of people were turned off by that. The pirate theme, I have to take responsibility. It's not actually a pirate-themed game, but a lot of the pirate elements are at the forefront of the game. And some designers leaned more heavily into it than others, which again is ultimately my responsibility. I don't think it's as piratey as a lot of people say, despite the pirates in the game. It is very colonial. It is very Age of Sail. Excuse me. But some people have said, and the setting, some people say, I just don't like the Polynesian setting. I don't like that there are pirates here. I don't like this stuff. Again, those are my choices. I'm responsible for that. And it was critically successful, at least among professional critics. And obviously there were people that didn't like the game, but I still think user-wise, it's still reviewed fairly well, in spite of the many issues that I've outlined that I take responsibility for and admit there are problems with. However, over time, the game has continued to sell very well. So the pre-sales for the game were 3 times Pillars of Eternity 1. Mm-hmm. So clearly there was a core enthusiasm for Deadfire. 3 times as many people pre-ordered it as Pillars 1. So in my mind, I was like, awesome, this is going to do really, really well. And sales fell off immediately after. And I believe, ultimately, people didn't know the game was coming out. And you can point to, there's lots of things you could say. It's maybe the crowded market, maybe all sorts of other stuff. But the fact that the game has continued to sell and finally did become profitable would suggest to me that, and anecdotally, I have seen many people across the internet, Reddit, something awful, all over the place, basically say, I didn't know this game was coming out. I didn't know there was a FIG campaign, because we switched from Kickstarter to FIG, which also may have contributed to people not being aware of it. And a lot of people say, I had no idea this came out. I really liked Pillars, but I didn't even know they were making a sequel until I saw it on sale on Steam or something like that. So ultimately, I think that there were many problems with Deadfire that I take responsibility for, but I think that the fact that over time it has sold well would be more indicative of the fact that it's not that it's fundamentally a garbage game.
No one said that, Josh.
No, it's plenty of people have said that.
No, but no one here.
Sure, fair enough.
We love Pillars of Eternity too in my podcast, so...
I appreciate that.
For example, I actually knew it was coming out because of my friend
that.
who keeps speaking about it.
Well, the reason I'm saying that is because there is also a pervasive theory among certain people on the internet who say that the reason it didn't sell well is that despite the sales and reviews, Pillars of Eternity was actually bad, and that most players were unhappy with it, and they didn't express this through reviews, but they were dissatisfied. So when Deadfire was launched, the silent majority made their dissatisfaction known not by saying anything, but by not buying the sequel.
Okay. But that proved to be wrong in the long run, you said.
Well, I mean, ultimately, it's kind of unprovable. The theory itself seems kind of ridiculous because, sure, that's a valid theory. I don't know how you prove that because it's entirely predicated on this silent ghost majority of people that anecdotally thought that the game was merely okay or actually bad, but didn't review it poorly and didn't say anything about it in a and so I just I don't even how do you disprove that? I'm like, well, sure. So there are people who will say actually Pillars was bad and actually also Deadfire was bad, and that's why no one bought Deadfire, because Pillars 1 was hyped and the loud voices drowned out all the people who simply played it and said actually this game sucks, and then didn't buy Deadfire, which is also bad. So, I don't know how you can prove that or really disprove it, because the premise is just not very easy to prove. Again, I do think, though, that in the long run, the fact that the game has continued to sell pretty darn well would indicate that it's fundamentally a pretty good game, and it has problems, and I hope that I have learned from the mistakes that I made in all these things. I don't want to discount the very valid criticism that people have had for it. But ultimately, I think it turned out to be a pretty good game. And yeah, lots of theories about it. I think people just didn't know it existed. And as they learned about it and played it, they liked it. So there you go.
Okay. And I have one more thing
cool.
I want from you in this interview. Then I will let you go, and you can go make new bike. How do you call
Awesome.
it? Frames.
Frames. Yep.
Okay. I know a thing about you that would be a great present for our listeners. I know you have a favorite Polish word. And would you like to share it, or would you like to keep it a secret?
I can share it, but the thing is, it's my favorite Polish word pronounced wrong. Zupi, which is not how it's pronounced.
No, it's pronounced Zuppe.
Zupa, which...
I think it's
Deutsch.
close enough, you know? What?
Well, it's in German, die Zupa. It's the same thing. So it's really the same word, spelled different, but it's spelled funny.
Yeah.
I like all of the Polish words that end in Y because they're funny to me. And in my mind, they'll always be pronounced E at the end, even though I know that's
Zupi and Mappy
Zupi,
instead
Mappy.
of Zuppe and Mappe.
Yeah, Mappy is another favorite. I just like all those because it makes them cute. I want some Zupi. Let me look at the Mappy. It's just funny. So yeah, that's it.
Yeah, okay.
Zupi.
So thank you, Josh. You spent
Thank you.
a while talking to me. So thank you for
that.
that.
I think that was 3 hours-ish, almost.
2.5 more like.
2.5.
Still pretty long. And
Pretty
I
long.
think I might transcribe that also, so it will be quite a long way to go.
Holy moly.
Yeah, but thank you, and I think we will talk maybe later soon.
Of course.
or whatever, if you have time. So thank you again.
Thank you.